Boom. We are live, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very excited to bring to you today one of the most interesting and profound stories I've seen in the last few months. We have Leif Cocks. He is the founder of the Orangutan Project. He's done amazing things working in the Borneo rainforest and Sumatra over here in Indonesia. And lately, the stuff I've been watching and the recent, interviews and documentaries that have been done on this project have inspired me. So I'm really excited to bring Leif on the show. Leif, how are you doing this afternoon?
Good, thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you. So the first question is just give us a little bit of the background, how you got started, and what ended up pushing you into creating the Orangutan Project.
About 30 years ago, I was working with 15 orangutans in captivity, and discovered that they were persons and self-aware beings just as we are, and they didn't belong in captivity. And so I also quickly discovered that they were being driven to extinction through the destruction of their rainforest homes. So I started the Orangutan Project to help save the different species of orangutan, and also started bringing those orangutans back into the wild and secure habitat that we, with our partners, was saving from the destruction.
So one of the things you mentioned there that stands out is noticing that these creatures were sentient. What were some of the first inclinations that you saw while doing this work that brought to your attention that these were very emotionally adept creatures and beings?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I guess all beings, from dogs to cats to mice, are sentient beings, and they feel, pain and suffering, and therefore we need to treat them, and respect their humanity, their rights. But when you get to a certain level of intelligence, what happens is a sense of ego is formed within us. And that means we project ourselves into the past and future. And our suffering greatly increases then, because we have anxieties about the past and worries about the future. And what I discovered, orangutans, as same as we do, have that. And so, for example, you would say, well, if you provide them all the food and everything in a safe environment, they should be happy. But that's not true for us, and it's not true for orangutans, because as persons, we have to have that freedom of who and how often who we associate with, and how often, and we have to have control over our environment, and control over our expectations and anxieties about the past and future. And so I discovered orangutans in the same boat, and despite really great care, they don't do too well. Just as we do when we're kept in those situations. And that just made it two things. One is their suffering was greater, because of the suffering from created in the ego as we experience. And two, that the only way we could really provide them a good life is in their own rainforest, in their own communities.
Yeah, you've hit on something here that's absolutely fascinating. I'd never really put it, or seen it in this light, but the idea of ego to see the past and the future, and from there to create one's own internal suffering based off the anxieties of being able to understand, a more lengthier process in what's taking place. So
Mm-hmm.
as you started to develop this understanding of there actually being a highly at least a fairly evolved ego involved in these animals, what were some of the telltale signs? Like, I mean, I'd seen one where they do a kissing sound and drop leaves almost as a cultural hello. Are there more unique cultures like this in the orangutan species that kind of go unnoticed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there's two aspects to the answer to that question. One is, let's say, how we know that they project themselves in the future. And one example is the big male orangutans. They have these big throat sacs to project, sound through the rainforest, and these big cheek pads, which basically is a megaphone, so they can direct that low frequency sound. And what they'll do before they go to sleep, they'll say, future me will be getting up in the morning and traveling in this direction. So they will call in the direction they intend to move the next day to warn the other males away and track the females. They also have what they call the theory of mind, where they actually know that they're alive and sentient, but they also know that you're alive and sentient. And for example, I had an orangutan that was wanting to escape, and she knew that my intent was to stop her from escaping. So she was taking every third brick out of the wall, working her way up to create a ladder. But every time it came along, she put the bricks back because she projected herself into my mind and knew that what she had to do doesn't make sense to cater for that. But in the more general sense to your question is intelligent persons such as humans, orangutans, and even elephants, we actually adapt to the environment primarily by culture, not by natural selection. So we're born not with these hard programmed brains with instinct. We're born with vacant brains and very little instinct. And our parents, and particularly our mothers, program the culture in us. And that's the way we can very easily and quickly adapt to every changing environment. And so each orangutan group in the wild has its own culture, and own understanding of how to do things and how to communicate with them. And that one of the reasons it makes reintroduction of orangutans so difficult is we have to try to regain and piece together that culture in order for them to readapt to living in the wild. But if you had, for example, a cat, and trying to reintroduce a cat into the wild, not much you have to do. They pretty much will go feral straight away because they're mainly instinct and very little learning. But orangutans is a challenge for us, mainly because they're persons and just as like us, culture is the predominant way they adapt to the environment.
Wow, this is such a fascinating area of discussion because of the psychology that's involved with the animal and the way you've mentioned culture as a growing point for the next question here is the jungle school is such a beautiful thing to see what you've done in understanding this cultural adaptation as in compared with instinctual adaptation. I think is commonly overlooked, but you've done such a great job of I guess I'll let you explain it, but tell us a little bit about what the jungle school is and how you've adapted and taught and
Mm-hmm.
share that cultural information with these beautiful creatures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there's first thing is you want to get the orangutans as soon as possible into a rainforest environment, because each day they spend, let's say, in a cage or in captivity, they're actually adapting to that very malleable period culturally to a different environment. And as we know, is if you adapt to a particular environment, culturally, and that environment changes very suddenly, you become maladaptive. And we see that with human cultures all over the world. You change the environment quickly, the society becomes maladapted because they can't change the culture quick enough to adapt to the new technology and the new paradigms. So we have to get these little guys out in the forest as soon as possible. But they've missed the 8 to 9 years of learning, of cultural transmissions from their mothers. And so we have to try to teach them ourselves. And we also try to pair the orangutans up with other orangutans, because each one may have a little bit of the culture they retain. One may know how to make the nests at night. One knows how to eat termites. One knows, how to use a certain vine. And so by learning off each other in a cultural group, they manage to piece together at least enough of their cultural understanding of the rainforest that they have a good chance of surviving, and then spontaneously learning new things as much as possible. And one of the great examples of things we're missing, this is why it's so, we've got to stop orphans from being created in the first place. We've failed, and we're just trying to deal with the compassion and humanity for these orphans. I mean, one example of some of the things we lose, we're seeing these orangutans in the wild, and scientists are showing that they're using a particular paste for their skin when they have a skin allergy. You know, they chew up the particular paste from plants and they use it for skin allergy. And we go, well, why are they using it and how? Actually, it doesn't take much because you actually go ask the local villagers and they're actually using the same plants for the same things. So independently, these two persons in the forest have learnt these medicines of how to use medicines for, malaria, skin conditions, that sort of stuff. And those things, we don't know, ourselves, and we're actually destroying these local communities and indigenous tribes themselves, which are losing their culture and their adaptations. And so, yeah, we're losing so much, and we just really just scratching the surface to understand how intelligent and how wonderful these persons of the forest are.
Yeah, that's a brilliant sentiment. So I guess while we're in this particular area, and I'll save the question that I had here, but let's talk a little bit about the deforestation that's been taking place, because there seems to be this kind of problem, reaction, solution, fail point that we've had where palm was being used as an alternative for the oil industry because you can use palm to power diesel trucks, etc.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel we resolve some of this? Is the best way to go just protecting as much of the rainforest as possible? Or because every time we seem to replace one crop idea with another, it seems to have negative consequences that we couldn't see further into the future?
That's exactly right. Unfortunately, we very unintelligently apply our conservation efforts in so many ways, and of course the end result is we don't achieve much. And the palm oil issue is a particular example. I mean, people talk about sustainable palm oil, but that actually is not possible, because all monocultures on agriculture are unsustainable by definition. That's just the way nature and science works. So you can't have a sustainable monoculture of palm oil. They will all collapse 50, 60 years' time and leave an environmental and economic wasteland in their wake. But do we boycott palm oil? Well, I think you hinted on, if you boycott palm oil, the businessmen destroying the forest will plant another unsustainable monoculture that will give them a good profit. And there's many alternatives, such as pulp paper, rubber, and sugar palm, as three examples. So you're not going to save any forest. And so what we're doing is we're looking at saving several complete ecosystems of the right type, shape, and size of forest. And so we can take the orangutans, the elephants and tigers and other biodiversity and indigenous communities through this extinction crisis. And it's not a blunt instrument. We don't just boycott a particular company or particular product, or have a particular action such as education, community development, science, research, ranges. We look at the illness, doesn't make sense, the disease affecting this ecosystem, and apply the right medicine, the right dosage. Yeah. Otherwise, what we do is people who perhaps never actually been to the ecosystem are saying, let's run a campaign against this company or this product, or why don't we support rangers because rangers are the key, or why don't we support education because education is the key. But they're really not, in a sense, doing the intelligent thing and diagnosing the disease of that particular ecosystem and intelligently applying the conservation actions for the outcomes. And this is what we seek to do, and take the rainforest and the orangutan through this extinction crisis. And unfortunately, we only got about 10 years to do that because we're really fighting over the scraps from many forests at this time.
I guess we're in this kind of darker area. Tell us about how much rainforest you guys have been able to acquire through the work that the Orangutan Project has been doing, and then how you've been able to go about protecting it, and maybe some of the problems and maybe or even easy parts of working with the Indonesian government specifically.
Mm-hmm. We do this at various different levels. Sometimes, we support the local communities to take legal action to protect their ancestral forest. So it's providing the the legal support and money for them to be able to compete against money interest to save their forests. We also have joint companies with our partners, and we lease large tracts of rainforest. So we asked the Indonesian government and said, look, don't turn this into palm oil. We will pay the taxes and everything, and we will restore the ecosystem back to its former glory. It's called ecosystem restoration concession. In other areas, again, with our local partners, it may be it's legally protected, but not in real terms protected. And so we will work under MOU to provide the funding and the training for rangers to support the area. And this way we piece together, if that makes sense, through a variety of methods, a functioning ecosystem of the right shape, size, and type of rainforest to make it viable. Because you can save bits of rainforest and you can save a few orangutans, but they will go extinct. You have to save, does it make sense, the rainforest in the right type, shape, and size, and it's going to be large enough to support sustainable populations. Otherwise, you may be ticking boxes, say I'll save some trees and save some animals, but we won't be handing to future generations viable populations and viable ecosystems for which we hope a more enlightened time we can re-expand the wilderness of our planet.
I guess as a layman and understanding some of the ecosystems that take place here, what's the biodiversity, I guess, in Borneo? I come from Costa Rica, and we have a very extensive biodiversity out there. But what's it like in these areas, and how much land do you think? I mean, the more the better, I would assume. But is there a bare minimum that you think exists? Just as a side question.
That's a very, very good question. Well, one of the two big biodiversity hotspots is obviously the Amazon and the rainforest of Borneo and Sumatra. The biodiversity is off the scale compared to most other ecosystems, and so you get huge value bang for your buck. And of course, from global warming, the destruction of rainforest causes more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than all the transport systems both combined. So it's your really, low-hanging fruit to mitigate some global warming by saving these forests. Now, to say what size forest, well, that ultimately depends on your megafauna. Because on a relatively small area, you can save, small monkeys and lizards and reptiles, because you can have a genetically viable population in a relatively small area because the small size and therefore large numbers. Now, so we're looking at in Indonesia we're not interested in any ecosystems that can't be saved below 200,000 hectares. The reason being is that is the minimum size if we get the right type of forest, and particularly the valuable lowlands, because you can have 200,000 hectares of highland forest and everything will go extinct because nothing lives up there and can live up there permanently. And so that's why I always say right type, shape, and size. It's just not just save 200,000 hectares. But in the question about size, if we get the other elements together, we still need about 200,000 hectares of rainforest in order to have a viable population of orangutans and the other large megafauna within that area.
And just out of curiosity here as well, how much land has the orangutan project currently secured and protected on its own mission over the last I guess the duration of your project?
At the moment, we secured about 200,000 hectares in the Bukit ecosystems with our partners, Franklin Zoological and WWF Indonesia, where we've got a joint company. We've formed another company with the partners, Centre for Orangutan Protection, and we're now in the application process of getting more land there to put together a 288,000 hectare ecosystem. And within central Kalimantan, we've been funding for many years and supporting our partner, the Borneo Nature Foundation, to protect 200,000 hectares of prime peatland in central Kalimantan. And we're in the early stages of looking at another ecosystem in central Kalimantan and one in Aceh in North Sumatra with other partners. And so that gives you the general lay of the land. And really what's stopping us is money. You know, that's the thing that keeps us on this trajectory, you know, that of not pulling together more ecosystems, because we have the knowledge and technology. And we have the wonderful on-the-ground partners, you know, really dedicated, you know, wonderful Indonesian conservationists who can get the work done. And so we form, in a sense, the hopefully the catalyst, does that make sense, and the good partner to make these things happen.
So I guess we have a kind of a rough sketch of the amount of size that we need for each place. What's the type of financial input that's needed for these projects? And yeah, I guess this will lead into some of the other questions, but we'll leave it at that one for now.
Yeah, for most of these, you know, the rule of thumb is, I'll say, you need about 1.2 million to get the concession, and then all up over a 10-year period, 5 million. Yeah, and the great thing is what we're exploring now with, and we've already started in Bukit Tikapulu, is we've connected with a wonderful organization, and they're actually working with us to develop the agricultural systems on the rainforest canopy. Yeah. And so, and at the moment we started planting vanilla under the rainforest canopy, and we also started producing and selling jungle honey.
Good.
Yeah. And what's happening, and they've done all the business models for us. You know, and this is why partners and everything is so fantastic. You know, and working with others is, we believe once we get the concession, within 10 years we can make them financially self-sustainable.
Yeah.
So they will pay and protect for themselves, and the indigenous communities will actually get a lot more wealthier doing it. So my goal as a person is to, I've got, let's say, 20 years of working life left in me. For 10 years, we get the forest, you know, enough forest to save these key ecosystems, and then 10 years after that, we will hand over to future generations not only environmentally sustainable ecosystems, but financially.
Yeah, this is, you know, Leif, this is beautiful, because one of the reasons that's brought me to this sector is my business mentor and I had been communicating about being in service to others, right livelihood, and things he called sacred capitalism and conscious capitalism. And it's the understanding that when I started to do research in the nonprofit sector, I realized that we had basically cut the legs off of any good business. And you have all these amazing people such as yourself who are going out and doing good in the world. And I can't imagine, it's probably disincentivizing to always have to continue to try to raise money. And the for-profit sector has this very unique ability to scale out and produce products, services. And with the internet and the media, the ability to brand these types of things too has really, really extended its reach in what it can potentially do. So I'm really excited to hear that, because this is what I'm excited about in this sector too, is the happy marriage between you know, conservation, environmentalism, and you know, what I feel is called sacred capitalism. And what you've just mentioned there is this perfect harmony between how do we continue to grow and scale and incentivize the people such as yourself to keep doing good. Because I can't imagine, you know, I only have a for-profit sector background, but you know, I could imagine that going out and trying to raise money all the time for this amazing work that you're doing isn't all that fulfilling. It's probably one of the most like least flavorful parts of the work that you do. So to hear you say that is very exciting for me. I got a thumbs up in the air the whole time. So I guess one of the questions I have while we're in this particular spot of the niche, what are some of the valuable lessons that you've had in the nonprofit sector And are there things you think we could do better, like moving to the for-profit model for these conservation environmental efforts?
Yeah. Well, I think always been sold this false paradigm is wildlife versus people, the environment versus economy. We're not against capitalism. We're against crony capitalism.
Yes.
We're not against people becoming prosperous and rich. We're just against people who are getting prosperous, rich, and passing the true cost of production onto the powerless. Indigenous community, local community, the orangutans, and future generations from destroying the planet and eating the future capacity. And we see, in a sense, the third, and when people are not talking about the fourth industrial revolution, we're talking about shared economies, and as an example. And so it's not about, and so we're seeing more and more. It's almost is. There's the dinosaurs, doesn't make sense, of capitalism, and they're not really the future, and they're not really, and the industries are not profitable. The industries are only profitable because they control politicians, and the industries are heavily subsidized, and they stifle new technologies and disruptive, businesses, who the future belongs to. And so we want to throw away that old paradigm of that's not where we want to do business anymore, and that's not what, and it's not because we don't like business. It's just that's of the past, and so we're talking about with these the agricultural systems. There's nothing wrong, doesn't make sense, of producing, money, doesn't make sense, and making people, and making everyone, benefit from an economy, and that's where we seek to do with our work.
I love it. It's absolutely brilliant to hear. So I look forward to some of the other conversations we'll have. I'll save some of the other thoughts and questions I have in that space for when we're offline, because one of the things I wanted to ask was, tell us, what's one of the most fascinating things about working in this sector, whether it's with the animals, the governments, or that I guess kind of change the way you feel about the work that you're doing in general?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's like anything. It's a journey, and of course you learn and develop along the way. I guess the major thing I've learned is you cannot change the world unless you change yourself. And so in order for you to do real good, does that make sense? You have to reform yourself before you can really reform the world. And I see so many people, trying to reform the world, and they're not embracing the inner change of reformation within themselves. And ego, and and drive for for the ego success of money, name, fame, and power can drive you very quickly. But you build this house of cards, that fall down, and this is why I think latest information saying all these CEOs of these top 500 companies, they're actually not very good at their job, and they actually produce very, very little wealth, because it's all bluster and confidence, is what, rather than substance. And of course, that doesn't work very well, especially in the not-for-profit sector. And so I would say, look, you don't have to go away and contemplate your navel in the Himalayas for 20 years before you go off and do something good in the world. But when you start the journey, to also start the journey in a reformation, because what happens, of course, is, if you do not feel that love and joy within yourself, you need external support, through reputation, name, fame, power, money. It doesn't make sense. Make yourself feel good. And you have to criticize others to position yourself, feel good about yourself, because I'm better because now I'm criticizing. And that, and so that's a very destructive element that creeps into conservation and reduces our effectiveness and our capacity for long-term change. And so in some ways, and this is where my book's starting to go to, and my last one, Finding Our Humanity, it starts talking more about the interaction between the personal reformation of our inner world and how that naturally reflects in the outer world, and can then create lasting benefit.
Yeah, the depth of of your philosophical story here is really encouraging. I mean, you know, I'm a young buck at 32 years old now, and I'm just starting to have the foundations to really drive forward with some of the stuff. And I've lived in the jungle. I've got sacred plant medicines, as I've said to you on it before we started this call. I've
Mm-hmm.
had a sloth that's lived on my property, and she's come back and been pregnant twice now since. So I've seen this life cycle take front shape in front of my eyes. And just the last 2 years, I started to realize that the skill set that I have might be able to help marry these ideas of the for-profit and nonprofit sector. So to hear your input and some of my other business, I guess I'll call them business mentors, is such an
Mm-hmm.
encouraging thing, because the whole process I was going through living in the jungle, playing with the animals and living, you know, fairly humbly, was an internal process. And now I can feel how the skill set starts to go and reflect outwards once that internal work has been not, I guess, not solidified, because the journey is supposed to be, I would imagine, infinite to some degree. So, but I'm extremely grateful for you sharing your time with us today, Leif. Tell us where everyone can find you on the social media channels. I will leave all these links below too. So for anyone watching the YouTube channel, do all those fun things like give us the likes, the comments, the subscribes, the shares, and make sure you guys check out Leif's new book, as well as the work that they're doing on Facebook. The content that they're producing is always fantastic. I'm really excited to see you guys making those steps. So can you tell us where we can find you guys as well?
You can find us at the orangutanproject.org, and we have, chapters all over the world. And of course, you can follow us on Facebook, and follow myself on Facebook, as examples, and reading the books. But also, about 4 times a year, I take people into the rainforest on various levels of journeys, in to see orangutans and the other wildlife, and that's another way of contributing and getting a real experience. And of course, for people who want to give, and which is wonderful, it's also a way for them to confirm and see what's happening with their gifts that they give us to help save orangutans and the other endangered species.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. I love this idea. Hopefully we can come visit you soon. Are you? And this is a side question. Yeah, we'll actually leave it. I hope we can come visit you soon, Leif. I really am deeply moved by the work that you guys have been doing, and the philosophical undertones to everything that's being done here, because it really resonates with what I feel I've been working on internally, and now a bit more externally as I get older too. So thank you for sharing your time. Remember, everyone, give us those thumbs up, leave your comments, your likes below as well. Remember to go check out Leif and the Orangutan Project. You can find them on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. They've done a great job of pushing out into the new technological age as well. And any closing thoughts you'd like to leave everyone with at the Arcane Bear family?
No, yes, yes. Thank you for your time, and yeah, and of course, I hope you find that love and joy within yourself, and that way it will naturally express for the benefit of all beings, which is, I think, the worthy way to spend one's life.
I agree wholly with your sentiments, Leif. And as our new saying goes, be grateful for all that you have, ladies and gentlemen, even your problems, because one day you won't have those either. This is Tio with the Arcane Bear. We're signing off with another great guest this afternoon. We'll see you guys again on the next episode.